On today's show, the Atlanta Hawks fall flat in a big way on the final game of their opening homestand. They lead early in the contest, only to really kind of fall off the cliff in the middle of this game, losing by 17 points in pretty surprising fashion at the hands of the Charlotte Hornets. We'll have full coverage of this one and a look ahead to the rest of the weekend and also the start of next week with a 5-game road trip looming for Atlanta. We'll have all of that on the show.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1334 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you deep into the night on a Sunday evening, October 23rd into the 24th of October, and to be starting the new week for the Hawks and everybody else on this Monday morning as you listen to this podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. First-time users can have a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That is PrizePicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON. And we thank you, as always, for joining us on the podcast and making us your first listen each and every day. Check us out across podcast platforms. That includes Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Stitcher. And on the video side, we are on YouTube as well. And today's podcast is going to break down the Sunday night game between the Hawks and the Charlotte Hornets, which was definitely a surprising outcome in a lot of different ways. The Hawks led this game for a little bit of the first half. They actually were up at double digits at one point, only to have the middle of the game really collapse. The Hawks lost the middle two quarters of this game by an 82 in two quarters. 254 fashion. That was kind of obviously what transpired in this one, kind of flipped the game. And with this loss, the first loss of the season for the Hawks, they fall to 2-1. That isn't disastrous after a 3-game homestand, but given the context of this one coming into the night and Charlotte's injuries and the homestand and all that fun stuff, not a great result for Atlanta in this one in a lot of different ways. And now, by the way, as we'll touch on at the end of the podcast, Hawks are not going to be going on the road for about a week and a half. A 5-game road trip is looming for Atlanta after this one. But yeah, not a satisfying outcome for the Hawks. A lot of frustration I saw already from Hawks fans. It's just one loss out of 82. That's something I'll preach throughout the season, I'm sure. I'll try not to get too high or too low along the way. But it's a marathon, and this is still a bad result. Both can be true at the same time, and they pretty much are at this stage. So as we always do in the podcast, we'll dive into sort of the context coming into the game, and then we'll get into how the game flow went, some takeaways, individual player analysis, and much more on the podcast. But we'll dive in right now. And this Hornets team is one that's a challenge. I am pretty low on Charlotte this year, candidly, and part of that is that I don't think their talent level is all that high. But in this game, you wouldn't have noticed that necessarily. They were 1-1 coming in. They're not 2-1, of course. They had blown out the Spurs, and they had lost to the Pelicans at home. We did cover the Hornets a lot last year because they played the Hawks in the play-in and they're a division rival of the Hawks, etc. They were a really good offense a year ago and a pretty bad defense a year ago. That's probably still the case now, although they have a different head coach now and Steve Clifford, who's a little bit better defensively than James Borrego probably. But the big thing is beyond Charlotte's, for me anyway, a roster that's not quite as good as the Hawks roster is, they were without 3 key pieces, especially 2 very key pieces of their roster. LaMelo Ball is still injured and is not playing right now. He is their best player. Terry Rozier is a guy who is not always the most solid necessarily. I think he's kind of a polarizing player, but at the very least, he's one of their top 3 or 4 players on this roster, and maybe their second engine on offense. And then Cody Martin is a rotational player for this team. All 3 were out in this spot. That's, again, their top 2 guards plus, and they're up to returning scorers from last year and another rotation guy as well. And honestly, I said this before the game, and I still believe it right now. It's going to look silly. It's going to look silly now after this game is actually over, but I believe this. I think this current roster from the Hornets that was on the floor on Sunday is actually worse than the Rockets and the Magic rosters that played against the Hawks on the first 2 games of the season. So that makes this loss look even worse, but I do believe that as a piece of context. On the Hawks side, just Bogey still out for Atlanta. No updates there. I know I'm getting questions every single day about Bogey's status. He's still not doing anything live. So until that happens, the Hawks are not going to be great about giving timelines. David McMillan's not going to be eager to share a lot of information, but he's not terribly close from what I can see, and that's kind of all I got at this point in time. Other than that, Jarrett Culver was inactive because the Hawks were just choosing inactives at this point in time, but that's kind of it in terms of the pregame stuff on the Hawks side. And our friends at BetOnline made the Hawks either a 10 or a 10.5 point favorite, depending on when you looked at the game before actual tip-off. That was the same line, basically, as the opener on Wednesday, which, of course, they won against the Rockets. And it was actually a bigger spread than the game on Friday against Orlando, which kind of tells you, again, that BetOnline and the market makers and kind of the people behind the scenes viewed this version of the Hornets as at least equally bad to maybe even worse than teams like Houston and Orlando, but that did not matter in this game. So we'll go to the top of the contest as we always do on the show. And the first quarter was the best quarter by a lot for Atlanta. It was actually kind of a sloppy start. They were 1 of 5 from the floor, 2 turnovers. It had some, by the way, some trademark in-arena shot clock issues in this one. Kind of funny. But they got going a little bit in transition after the first couple of moments. And David Milton said this after the game as well. He did enjoy the pace early on, and so did I in watching. In fact, there were 3 buckets in a row from Trey and DeJounte Murray in transition. Charlotte was not having a lot of resistance. In fact, the Hawks had a 17-2 run in this game and lost by 17 points. That's crazy, though. They went from down 2 to up 13 in the early going, and they made 7 out of 9 shots in that run. Charlotte could not score really at all at that stretch. Rotationally, not a lot of surprises here, other than there was one little sort of slip up because it was foul trouble related, but it was Okongwu coming in early. Then Capella came back in. The last 2 games that actually happened again. If you missed it on Friday, the Hawks kind of went out of their way, it seemed like, to pair Capella and Trey together and to pair Okongwu and Murray together by kind of getting Capella out a little bit earlier, having him sit for a very brief time, and then bringing him back in with Trey, and then coming back out at the start of the second quarter. That happened again here. By the way, Okongwu came in and took and made a 15-footer on his first stint. That was nice to see. He looked pretty comfortable with that shot. Kind of took his time. It was smooth. It was wide open, but he definitely just buried it and confidently. That was good to see. Then it was Aaron Holiday and Jalen Johnson, and then Justin Holiday a little bit later. As we'll get into later on, AJ Griffin was the 10th guy who appeared, but it was not until the fourth quarter when the Hawks were already on by 20. So it's still a 9-man rotation, and we'll get into more of that later on in the podcast. But the Hornets at one point in the first quarter had 9 points in about 9 minutes. Now, they scored 126 points in this game. So basically, in the final 39 minutes, they scored 117 points. That is not going to work for any defense. And by the way, that also includes a little bit of garbage time at the end where the Hawks were kind of just done the last 3 minutes, probably, maybe 4 minutes or so. So this could have been 130 plus from the Hornets pretty easily with how things were. And that's with them opening 3 of 14 from the floor with 3 turnovers, and they were 3 of 7 at the line in the early going as well. Trey got his 3rd foul, and that kind of, I'm not going to say that swung the game. That was a huge factor, though, along the way. That was the first time the Hawks had sort of altered their rotation this season, really, because they were kind of forced to take Trey out with 3 in the first quarter. I do believe that it's the right thing to do to leave Trey on the floor with 2 fouls. A lot of guys, Nate will kind of just default to pulling them, whether it's Capella or Collins or whoever else. I think Trey is the exception to that. I think that playing him with 2 fouls in the first quarter is the right decision. It didn't work out for them here. He's a pretty low foul player, though. With 3, you got to pull him. I get that, but I didn't mind that as a strategy, by the way. Just want to get out in front of that. But it did flip things. The Hawks were much better with Trey on the floor in this game than without him on the floor, and that was kind of a part of the flow. Then sort of went against them in that stage from this point forward. The Hawks were up by 13 at one point in the first quarter, up 8 at the end of the quarter. They didn't shoot the ball that well, but they had a 120 offensive rating because they were dominating the offensive glass in the first quarter. They had 7 offensive rebounds. That was more than Charlotte had defensive rebounds in the first quarter of this game. Capella was on the glass for 3 offensive rebounds. They did turn it over 5 times, but they got some good defensive stops in the first quarter. And unfortunately, that kind of evaporated pretty quickly after that, as we'll get into throughout this podcast. In fact, let's take a stop now. We'll sort of change gears to get into the rest of the game, because it definitely changed for the Hawks after the first quarter. And we'll come back in a second. But first, a word from our sponsors on the show today. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. If you're looking for a daily fantasy option this year in the NBA or anything else, check out the award-winning app at PrizePicks. PrizePicks Daily Fantasy made easy. I love it, and I know that you will too. It's so very easy to use. I can vouch for that. I've been playing on a lot of different places over the years, and PrizePicks is by far the best. It has a variety of sports. I really enjoy the daily grind of going through the numbers as well. And all you have to do is pick 2 to 5 players and weigh in on whether they have more or less than a certain number of points, rebounds, assists, or any other stat you might have interest in across the sports world. What if 10 times as much as your entry is on any single entry? And you're not just going against other people, you're going against the projections. And PrizePicks offers numbers on any sport you can think of that you might enjoy. That includes, of course, the NBA and college basketball, WNBA, NFL, college football, MLB, NHL, PGA, soccer, esports, NASCAR. They have MMA and boxing, cricket, and much more. And entries can be done in just a minute or less. It's just that easy and that simple. PrizePicks also they have safe and fast withdrawals. They're operating in more than 30 states. That includes Georgia as well. And they're operating in Canada. And download the PrizePicks app today and go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. And if you're a first-time user, you have a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKED ON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will match that with $100. And if you deposit $50, PrizePicks will also match that all the way up to $50. It's a 100% deposit match. If you do not forget to enter the promo code LOCKED ON at sign up for the instant deposit match up to $100. Check it all out right now at PrizePicks. All right, we'll dive in now to the second quarter of this game, and this is when things really started to flip against the Hawks. It was Murray and Collins plus the bench unit at the start of the second quarter. That did not go very well. We saw a little bit less of Jalen Johnson again in this game. He is definitely the number 9 guy in terms of the playing time so far. That's not a huge surprise, but he's not been playing all that well in my mind either. Anyway, though, the Hornets opened with the first 14 points of the second quarter to take the lead. They erased an 8-point deficit, and it was actually once 13. It was a 16-0 run dating back to the first quarter, and a 25-6 run by the Hornets going from when the Hawks went up by 13 until then. That was also when Trey got a second foul, by the way. But the Hawks didn't score for more than 3 minutes at the outside of the second quarter. I thought it was a really bad stretch from McConwu. He had a couple of turnovers, at least one turnover, a missed jump shot, a foul that was pretty bad. Then Murray turned it over that led right to a bucket from the Hornets, and then Nate called timeout. And then after the timeout, Charlotte hit another 3. So that whole stretch was just really rough across the board. They finally get Trey back in the game, down double digits mid-second quarter. They were in the bonus quickly. Got the lead down to 5 or so for the Hornets, but it was stable for a while. It was 10 again with like a minute and a half to go. And the Hawks did close well, cutting the lead from 10 down to 4. I thought it was going to be pretty encouraging, honestly. If you would ask me during halftime, I'll be honest about this. I thought the Hawks were probably in good shape here, down only 4 after being down by 10 plus, kind of clawing back and feeling pretty good there. But down 4 at the half, the Hawks really offensively were not playing all that well, but not terribly. In fact, they had almost exactly the same offensive rating in both halves of this game. It was the defense that kind of got away from them in a lot of ways. They got to the line 20 times in the first half. That's a huge break. They did lose the turnover battle, which you don't want to do if you're the Hawks team who's kind of banking on being better than their opponent in that particular stat. But Trey and DeJounte had 29 points combined. Collins and Hunter had a rough half. I will say both those guys struggled offensively in the first half. But again, it was the defense that was the bigger problem. Defensively, though, they got smoked in the second quarter for 37 points. We'll come back to this in a second, but even worse than the third quarter. But 14 assists in the half for Charlotte in the first, and 7 offensive rebounds along the way as well. And again, coming out of halftime, still feeling fine. It was the same exact deficit at the half that they had on Friday. And again, they won pretty comfortably. But immediately, it was a 10-0 run, again, by the Hornets to go up by 14. That was their large deficit at that point in time. It continued to grow later on. There was a 3-point play by Capella to kind of stop the bleeding a little bit early in the third, but that was kind of the only brief moment of brightness and joy because the Hornets got back up to 15 pretty quickly. Nate was pretty frustrated, called a quick timeout. And at that point, in 27 minutes, the Hornets had 75 points. That's way too many points for that period of time. The Hawks did have their one run that came in the third quarter. It was a 9-0 to go from down 18 to down 9 again. Trey had 5 in a row. There was a little bit of wobbliness from the Hornets at that stage. There was a blatant take foul by Charlotte that was called and sort of a free point for the Hawks. But the Hornets, to their credit, just kept making shots. Like, I don't think the Hawks defensively were as bad as the numbers indicate in this game. They weren't great by any means, but the Hornets did make a bunch of shots. And credit to them. That's going to happen sometimes in the NBA. That's probably the number one thing of how you lose a game to a team that you're better than in the NBA is just that team makes a bunch of shots or you miss a bunch of shots. I know it sounds very simple, and it kind of is on some level. There's always stuff beyond this, and that's why we get into all of the stuff, not just shooting numbers, the turnovers and rebounding and free throw attempts, etc. But really, the big swing in this game was that the Hornets made a bunch of shots and the Hawks misses a bunch of shots, and there you go. Anyway, the Hawks were at one point, like as soon as Capella came out of the game in the third quarter, it was a layup line for a while against Okongwu in that smaller front court. It was kind of rough on that line. There was a possession with about 4 minutes left in the third quarter when Nick Richards kind of got all the way to the rim, kind of almost like untouched for a dunk. That was a tough one for Okongwu. Everybody else on the help side there, but there was a brief moment in the third when the Holidays came in where the defense kind of stiffened a little bit, but as soon as that happened, the offense kind of got worse, and then the defense kind of regressed a little bit from there as well. There was a big corner 3 from Justin Holiday. It felt like it was kind of an important moment. I guess it wasn't in the end. Jalen Johnson struggled, I thought, mightily in that quarter. The bench units basically just got rocked in the first 3 quarters of this game, and that was kind of a big reason why the Hawks were in terrible shape there. Late in the third quarter, Trae Young got a technical foul. He wanted a goaltending call, and by the way, he was correct. If you watch the replay, it was definitely goaltending. It was uncalled. He got a tee. Charlotte did miss the free throw, so no harm done there, but that was at least notable at the end of the third quarter. And then basically the Hawks are down by 20 at the end of the third quarter. And again, they gave up 82 points in the middle 2 quarters of this game. Charlotte scored 45 points in the third. They shot 71% from the floor. They were 5 of 5 from 3. No matter how bad you are defensively, you can't account for 5 of 5 from 3 and 70+% from the floor. That's tough. Plus 10 of 12 of the line in a single quarter is a lot as well. The Hawks had a 139 defensive rating through 3 quarters. And again, the first 9 minutes of this game, the Hornets had 9 points. So from that point forward, I don't have the exact number, but I bet you the defensive rating for the Hawks was like in the mid 140s, maybe 150 range. It was that bad for a long time in this one. We'll get into the rest of this now, but basically it wasn't all garbage time in the fourth quarter, but it was a lot of garbage time in the fourth quarter. The headliner though was AJ Griffin making his debut at the start of the fourth quarter. He didn't play a ton. He played a little bit. He came in place of Aaron Holiday in the rotation. He had a three on his first ever shot attempt in the NBA. Congratulations to him on that. Also had a steal and a finish in transition. Again, only played like 5 minutes or so before he actually came out the first time, and came back with a little bit of garbage time at the end. But I thought he looked good, looked crisp, and I certainly was not going to quiet the calls to play AJ Griffin, which we'll come back to in just a second. But the Hawks were, at least smartly, I thought, trying to get threes up and push the tempo a little bit in the fourth when they were down by 20. You kind of have to play a high variant strategy when you're down by 20 points to get back in the game. But they couldn't make a bunch of shots. AJ made his one 3 at the top, but Holiday I think was 2 or 3 in a row that he missed. There were decent looks. A couple other guys missed some looks as well, and they were down by 18 with like 8 minutes to go. There was one more breath of life. Trey hit a deep 3. It's kind of the 15 or so. And then after they fouled, the Hornets missed both free throws, which allowed for the home crowd to have some free Chick-fil-A, and they get a stop there. And then a dunk for Okongwu with Trey setting that up in beautiful fashion. And then Plumlee ran over DeAndre Hunter for a offensive foul. And then John Collins had a dunk, and it was down to 11 with 6 minutes to go. Now, you're still a big underdog, down 11. But it was 11 versus 20. The home crowd was into it, etc. That was their one opportunity to kind of close the gap a little bit. But after that, they were down 13, and I thought it was a big swing. I'm not trying to pick on Hunter on this one, but Hunter had a wide open 3 in the corner, like wide open 3. That would have got it to 10 that he missed. And then from there, it was basically Charlotte gets a layup because Trey goes for a steal that he had no business going for. That was an easy layup for them. Back to 15, a couple of trips on both sides. Then the Hornets score again. It's 17. It was probably it at that point, and it was really over with about 3 minutes to go when Hunter fouled Kelly Oubre on a 3. He made all three free throws, and it was up. They're down 20, and that's the end of the game. So yeah, with like 140 to go, they empty the bench, and not much to be said about the garbage time minutes in this game, but it was pretty hideous at times in the second half of this one. And again, really the middle of the game, 82 to 54 in the middle section. It's second and third quarters of this one. The offense was not the problem, as we'll get into, but yeah, it was pretty rough. So offensively, we'll start there. It was not horrible in this game, a 109 offensive rating. And I will say, without Ball and Rozier, Charlotte's defensive talent was actually better in this game than it normally is. They played more of their guys. Dennis Smith's not a great defender, but he's probably better than LaMelo. Kelly Oubre, same thing. Like they have a little bit more size when they're playing Hayward at the 3. They were playing obviously more of their backups. Richards had a great game off the bench for them. JT Thor is very, very large. McDaniels, even Teo Maledon, etc. But still, 109 is not going to be good enough against a team like the Hornets playing at home. And again, the biggest thing was the shooting stats. The shooting splits were just horrible for Atlanta compared to what Charlotte was able to do. The Hawks shot 41% from the floor in this game, which will get you beat every night, but it's not great. And they were 8 of 35 from 3. That tells the story in a lot of different ways. In fact, I'm not going to pile on just yet, but 3 games, the Hawks are shooting 30.8% from 3. And I think if you watch the film, and I've seen every minute of the season so far, most of it more than once, it's pretty stark. The Hawks don't have a lot of shooting on this roster. And I've said that a lot already in the offseason. I'm sure longtime listeners are kind of done with me saying that. But it is true. Without Bogey in particular, the Hawks don't have enough shooting. I believe that wholeheartedly. Now, they're still going to shoot better than this. There are some guys on this roster that are below their numbers right now than they normally would be at this stage through 3 games. Trey's shooting has been a little bit shaky so far. I think he's at 25%-ish for the season. That's pretty rough for him. That's going to come up. So that's just one example. Hunter and Collins today combined to shoot 1 of 12 from 3, and those guys actually have been pretty good so far from 3. So a little bit of noise there. It's still early, but 3-point shooting has been a challenge for the Hawks, and they're also below average in attempts, so that's not a great situation necessarily. They did well actually everywhere else other than shooting. The Hawks did pretty well on offense. They actually did a great job protecting the ball in this game. A 12% turnover rate is very, very good. They had an offensive rebound rate over 30%. That's very, very good. Second chance points. They were 23 of 28 from the free throw line, which is very, very strong. Their passing was just fine. 23 assists in this one. That's about their average, maybe a little bit below that. But with turnovers, that's totally fine. It was just that they didn't make shots, and the Hornets made a lot of shots. In fact, defensively, the full game defensive rating was 126. That is very bad. And honestly, it was much worse than that before the basically the final 5 minutes of almost garbage time. It was in the 130s the entire way. It was really, really rough. I will say it was pretty incredible balance-wise from the Hornets until the very end. They didn't have anybody that even had more than like 17 points. They ended up with 2 guys with 20, but they had 8 guys score at least 8 points. Nick Richards had 20. That was kind of the one outlier, but Oubre had a big game of the starters. But it wasn't like anybody just singularly killed them. They just kind of had a great shooting game around the entire roster. They were 11-26 from 3, 52% from the floor. They had 28 assists, which is a lot for this team, especially without LaMelo Ball. 14 turnovers is not terrible for the Hawks to be forcing that many, but not like outstanding either. The Hornets had 30 attempts at the line. That's a lot. And they had a lot of offensive rebounds as well in this game. So basically the Hawks, if you look at their defensive baseline stats in this one, they're all bad. Essentially all of them are bad. So this is definitely a defense first loss. Part of that, again, is the Hornets being very hot shooting-wise in the middle quarters, but the Hawks were not good defensively for the most part in this one, and we'll come back to more of that in a second. But that's kind of the story of the game as it was. We'll come back in a moment to talk about the individual players and some more final takeaways as well as a look ahead to the rest of this week and beyond. But first, a word from our sponsors on the show today. It's time now to go into the individual players in this one, and a lot of not great performances, as you might expect for a game that went as poorly as this one did. We'll kind of ignore the guys who came in with 2 minutes to go, your Tyrese Martins, Trent Forrest, Vit Krejci. They came in late. Not a whole lot to be said about those guys. AJ Griffin, we'll go there now. A lot of questions, as you might imagine, people wanting us to follow up with Nate McMillan about rotation stuff. Number one, Nate does not like to share information about rotations. That's for sure. I try to ask. He kind of always looks at me crazy when I do that. I know others have that same kind of vibe, but I will say he got a question about the rotation after the game. I'm going to play the answer for you now. It's kind of having to do with AJ, but also just generally speaking, them playing 9-man so far, rotations every night. So this is what Nate had to say after the game on Sunday.
The 9 is pretty much the 9-man rotation that we're probably going to look at. I think all of our guys have to be ready to go, pretty much like AJ tonight. If we want to, switch him in place of one of the 9, or if we want to go 10-man rotation. So all those guys are available. We're still working on rotation as well.
So there you go. Not a hugely satisfying answer. And I will say this, people have kind of, at least that I've seen, people kind of asking questions and I've seen on Twitter, have kind of focused on AJ Griffin versus Justin Holiday. That isn't the comparison I'd be making. I think it's actually Aaron Holiday. Justin did not shoot well in this game. But number one, I think Justin is a better player than Aaron. Number two, I think that shooting wise, Justin is a better shooter and a more willing shooter than Aaron. And I think generally speaking, Aaron is the guy that if the Hawks were to go away from someone to use AJ Griffin, it would probably be Aaron Holiday. Now, if you had an injury to Trey or DeJounte, you'll see Aaron again because he's more of a ball handler in a lot of ways. But, if people kind of ask me again, like, would you play AJ? I've been saying the whole way, I like to see a little bit of AJ. I understand he's a rookie. And I think that Nate's going to trust the veterans always. But would it blow me away if they went to AJ over Aaron Holiday in the next game? No. I think Aaron is a reasonable veteran player, but I'd be probably trying AJ at different points. And I think basically, as I've been saying since the summer, with Bogey out, just having a shooter out there like AJ would be very significant. Like he's not always going to shoot 2 or 3 from 3 every night. Like even he, as a great shooter in my mind, a great budding shooter, is going to shoot probably 40% in the league multiple times. Like he's not going to make every shot, but the threat of him is important. And I think you probably want to see that at some point. Am I going to yell and scream about it? No, not yet. But I think that it would be worth trying a little bit more often when you're not down by 20, as they were in this game when he came in the game. But anyway, he played well. I thought he looked good. Obviously a small sample size, about 5.5, 6 minutes, but I thought it was a positive step for him individually. Jalen Johnson struggled, I thought. 3 points, 2 rebounds. He does have the size that you look for in the burst, but offensively in the half court, he doesn't have a whole lot to do right now. I think maybe if you're going to play him, put the ball in his hands a little bit more. Defensively, he's having a lot of young guy moments. Like obviously, the size is really intriguing, but he had a couple breakdowns that were pretty obvious in this one. Didn't play all that well. Aaron Holiday struggled mightily in this one. 2 points on 0 of 4 from the floor, 0 of 2 from 3 in 14 minutes. Had a steal and a turnover. It was minus 22. That's rough. Justin Holiday, same thing. 3 points, 1 of 7 from the floor, 1 of 5 from 3. Had a block, but that was kind of it for him. And again, those bench units, I talked about them earlier, but anytime Trey was off the floor in this game, the Hawks were getting smoked. And it wasn't all just because Trey was off the floor. It was that the Holidays struggled in this one. Jalen really struggled in this one. So those units that have those guys together, that trio together, was not playing well in this game. And I thought Okongwu had some moments, but pluses and minuses there. We'll get to him now, actually. 10 points, 5 rebounds, did have a steal and 2 blocks. He was better at times. I thought Richards really went through him a few times. I think defensively, he's had much better nights. I'm very high on Okongwu's defense. This is not the greatest night of his defensive career to this point. He finished well around the rim, had the one jumper as well. I thought he was okay. Had some weird downside moments there for him. Had some nice upside moments too. Again, the 2 blocks and the steal, etc. But I think that he'll be better in the future than he was tonight. To the starters. The guy who played the least was Capella. Him and Okongwu basically split evenly because the Hawks were playing a little bit faster, which makes a lot of sense going with Okongwu when you're trailing. I thought Capella had kind of an interesting game. He had 14 points and 10 rebounds, so a double-double there. He had a steal and a block. I thought the first half, especially the first quarter, he was really good defensively, like walling off the rim, contesting shots, not necessarily blocking them, but just being in the way and being really good. He also kind of, along with everybody else, let up a little bit in the middle of the game. I'm not sure if that was just because he didn't have the juice or whatever, but I thought it was a mixed bag for Capella. And generally speaking, I think Capella is more valuable than most believe that he is. I would say that about this game as well. But he was part of those, a couple of those units that got smoked with the bench, like the Murray units that were not playing very well. Anyway, I thought it was kind of a mixed bag game for Capella. He wasn't terrible by any means, and the double-double does mean something to me, but it is what it is. Collins and Hunter both struggled offensively. Now, I thought Collins was awesome defensively. He was probably the only guy on the team that I would say like graded out as good or better than normal defensively in this one. Had 4 blocks, and he had 10 points, 10 rebounds, 4 blocks, and a steal. But he didn't shoot the ball well. After being incredibly efficient and productive the first 2 games, Collins was 3 of 12 from the floor and 0 of 7 from 3. So he was actually 3 of 5 on 2s and 4 of 4 at the free throw line. Just didn't have a 3-point shot in this game. Him and Hunter combining to go 1 of 12 is kind of untenable in a lot of ways. I thought Collins played well. He just missed shots, and that's going to happen sometimes, but I thought he was pretty good on the whole. Hunter was quiet in this one. Wasn't his best performance. 10 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, though, which is good to see him sort of moving the ball there. And he was 3 of 6 on 2s as well. Just didn't shoot well from 3. Defensively, not his best, but that was kind of the case across the board. I thought Murray was okay. 19 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, a steal, and a block for DeJounte. Had 4 turnovers, though, the most on the team. Efficiency-wise, actually probably the best guy on the team other than the centers, of 7-15 from the floor and 2 of 4 from 3. But I thought he was just okay. And then Trey, again, kind of a weird one for him too. I think defensively, he kind of regressed. He was probably a little bit better than usual the first couple games, not as much in this one, but he had 28 points and 9 assists in 33 minutes. He didn't shoot well. And again, I think for 3 games, he's like 25-ish% from 3, but he was 7 of 17 on 2s, 2 of 8 on 3s. And if you combine, if you want, I mentioned it before, but the 1 of 12 from Collins and Hunter, you can go a little bit beyond that. Collins, Hunter, and Trey were the 3 most prolific 3-point attempters in this game. They combined to shoot 3 of 20. What are you going to do? That's kind of what happens. I thought Trey, when he played, was good. The foul trouble definitely hurt them in this game, and he'll have better nights at the office. So I don't know. It was a mess for sure. I'll just say this at the end of the podcast. So far through 3 games, again, a small sample size, the offense has been the bigger problem. Now tonight it was the defense because the Hornets made a bunch of shots. But 3 games, the Hawks have a 108 offensive rating. That's not good for a team that's built like the Hawks are. On the bright side, they have a 107 defensive rating, which is excellent for how the Hawks are. That includes tonight. So he's even better than that. Now, they've played against 3 pretty bad teams. I know they lost to the Hornets, but I can tell you with confidence, this current edition of the Hornets from Sunday is a pretty bad team. They just happened to play well tonight. But the Hawks needed to go at least 2-1, preferably 3-0 against the 3 teams. Kind of a tough loss in that respect, but it's not the end of the world. And yeah, from here, as I've sort of teased out a little bit a couple times now, we'll look ahead. The Hawks go on their first road trip of the season. Obviously, they had the very, very long trip to Abu Dhabi, and then when they came back, they went to Cleveland and then Birmingham and back. But now, after being home for a week and a half, basically between the end of the preseason and the beginning of the actual season, they go on the road. It's a 5-game trip. It's tied for the longest trip of the season for Atlanta. They play on Wednesday in Detroit, and then they play again in Detroit on Friday. It's one of those baseball-style series that the Hawks have, the NBA has kind of put in the last couple of years for travel purposes. They play 2 games in 3 nights in Detroit. The Pistons are not going to be great this year, I don't think, but they are pretty talented, and those are road games, of course. Then they go to Milwaukee, they go to Toronto, and then they go to New York before they come back. The Hawks don't have a home game again until Saturday, November 5th. So basically 12 and a half days between games, from Sunday early evening to next Saturday between home games. So if you are looking to see the Hawks in person, it'll be a little while. Anyway, more challenges to go. I've said it before a number of times. These first 5 games are pretty friendly. Detroit, even though on the road, those are games the Hawks should be able to be favored in at this point. But then it gets much tougher from there. You're playing Milwaukee on the road. You're playing Toronto on the road. Even the Knicks, who are definitely frisky and well coached. And nothing is assured on this road trip. So we'll see how they fare. I think 3-2 would be a very strong result, I think, generally speaking, on this road trip. But we'll come back and we'll have every step of the way covered on this podcast. Last thing, it's 1 of 82. I know I'm going to say that a lot of different times this season. This is a bad performance. Anytime you're favored by 10 and a half points in an NBA game and you lose by 17, that is not good, especially when there was no injury or whatever that sort of ruined the game for you. There's foul trouble stuff. I know people won't throw with the officiating, but you don't lose by 17 points because of officiating, at least against a bad team like this. So one to kind of write off, you're hoping, for the Hawks, and we'll see how they fare later on this week. We'll have full coverage. We'll have at least one show between now and the game on Wednesday. I can promise you that, maybe even 2, but at least 1 will be in the feed. Please subscribe to the podcast across podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and then YouTube on the video side. Please leave 5-star ratings and reviews across platforms as well. Follow us on Twitter at LockedOnHawks. Follow me on Twitter at BTRowland. If you have a question for the show, fire it to us at LockedOnHawks@gmail.com. That's LockedOnHawks@gmail.com. I do appreciate everyone listening to the podcast. Hopefully enjoying this show despite the actual results of the Hawks in this particular spot. Enjoy your week and the start of it on Monday, and we'll see you later on this week.